I am going to read a book to you called Mikey and the Dragons, and it is written by Jocko Willink. Let's go investigate this story. There was once a young boy named Mike, and there were many things in the world that he didn't like. He was scared of spiders and beetles and bugs and always thought they hid under rugs. They were creepy and cruelly and nasty and mean, and he ran from every bug he had ever seen. But it wasn't only the insects that gave Mikey a scare. There were many other things for which Mike didn't care. He left the light on when he went to sleep at night. He was scared there were monsters ready to bite. Hidden in his closet or under his bed, he thought they might get him when he lay down. He imagined a monster with giant teeth and claws, grabbing his neck and with giant paws. And if it wasn't monsters coming to take him away, it would be slimy, slithering snakes slithering his way. Yes, Mikey was scared of evil snakes too. He was horrified of what they could do. They could sneak into the house and hide in his drawer, then bite him to bits, of that he was sure. There were many other things that gave Mikey a scare, which meant there were many things that Mikey did not dare. He didn't like the water or go for a swim. He was scared that giant sharks might come and get him. He didn't like the playground with ladders and slides. He thought if he fell off, he would surely die. Yes, as you can see, things for Mikey were bad, and being afraid made Mikey very sad. Because so many things scared Mike to the bone, it turns out that Mikey was often alone. He would sit by himself and look at the sky, and then he would quietly ask himself, why? Why did so many things give him a scare? How could he ever overcome all that fear? How could he ever stand up and be brave? Or would being afraid always make him a slave? Some great questions and rhymes. And then one day, Mikey noticed a book. He opened it up and took a quick look. It had pictures of dragons with fangs like a snake and all kinds of scary things that made Mikey shake. But in the pictures, there was a boy too, who didn't look scared, but looked like he knew what to do. And even though Mikey was scared indeed, he decided he would give the book a read. He opened the first page, which he eagerly read, and this is what the dragon book said. There was once a kingdom, long ago and far away, and the kingdom had suffered a terrible day. Their protector and leader, the king, had died. And when they found out, the whole village cried. When the king was alive, he was a powerful force. Now they took the dead king away by carriage and horse. They knew that they would miss him, and that made them sad, but there was someone else that made them feel bad. The king had always been so strong and brave and protected the kingdom from the dragon cave. The dragon cave was just over the hill and filled with scary creatures that were ready to kill. Horrible dragons of every single type who thought people in the kingdom were especially ripe. The people thought dragons had breath of fire, and the dragons stood 20 feet tall or higher. They thought the dragons had sword-stopping scales and powerful long razor-sharp tails. But the brave king never let the beasts around. He stood up and fought and held his ground. As long as the king had been the king, none of the dragons could do a thing. Yes, the king had always kept the dragons at bay by going out and bravely into the fray. It seemed without fear the king would go fight. he'd beat the dragons and come home at night. But now the king had died and was gone. There was only one person to fight and carry on. But that person wasn't big or mighty or strong. In fact, he hadn't been alive that long. Now the person who had dragons to chase was just a little boy with a smiling face. Yes, that person must now stand up and be bold. He was the little prince who was only 7 years old, and the people in the village just couldn't be sure that this young boy, the little prince, could endure. How could someone so young and so small stand up to the dragons that were so tall? And the prince himself, he also didn't know if he had the courage it would take to go, because he was so little and so small and so young. He didn't know if he could get the job done. How could he handle the mean dragon's yield when he could barely lift a sword or a shield? But no one else dared to step up and fight, not the kingdom's guards or even the knights. So even though the prince was scared, he still knew that fighting the dragons was something he must do. So he went to the king's bedroom and opened the door, and he went inside and walked across the floor. He opened an old chest that was tall and wide, where the king had kept all his war gear inside. The shield was big and the sword was so long, it was no wonder the king had been strong. But the prince was a boy, not a king like his dad, and to lift up the gear took all the strength the boy had. And that made the prince get even more nervous, and he wondered if he was ready for this service. Fighting dragons was such a scary task. The prince, to himself, had some questions to ask. How could a little boy ever be a man? How could the little prince ever make a stand? But at the bottom of the chest there was a small note, and it looked like something that the king wrote. So just when the prince thought he was over and done, he picked up the note, and it said, "To my son." He took a deep breath and opened the note he had found, and this is what his father, the king, had written down. "To my son, if you are reading this now, it means I am gone, and you are the one who must carry on. Our kingdom is now, and you must save. And to do that, you must be brave. I know that you think you don't know what to do, but remember, I was once a boy too. I was also small and had fear in my heart, and I didn't even know where I could start. I couldn't imagine going over the hill to face the dragons that wanted to kill. But don't worry, son, you'll be fine. If you can keep these things in your mind, the dragons, they really aren't that big at all. It's only in our minds that we make them so tall. Inside our brains, things always get overblown, especially things that are completely unknown. But when fear settles in and gets a hold of you, here are some things you must simply do. Stand up straight and hold your head high and look your fears right in the eye. Don't look away and don't try to hide. Know that you have great strength deep inside. When you stand up and you go into the fray, you will feel your fears start to go away. And though there will be horror you feel, the things you are scared of are not a big deal. This is not to say you won't feel a scare. Fear is a feeling that all of us share. Fear is normal for every person on earth, but this is where a hero proves his worth. A coward runs away when danger is near, but a hero will face the thing that they fear. So that's what you must do, my son. Face the dragons and do not run. And I promise when you meet them, you will see that you are just as strong as me. The dragons that seem so mighty and mean are not as ever bad as they might seem. And most of the things that fill you with dread are usually just things made up in your head. Love from your father, the king, and the prince. And now the boy was still scared, but not so much as bad, after he'd got done reading the note from his dad. The next day he got up and began to get ready. He was still scared, but the note kept in his mind, kept him steady. Of course, he still felt some fear in his mind, but he knew we would have to keep it confined, and despite all the fear he knew he had to listen to his dad. So he picked up the shield and he picked up the sword and he held up his chin and he went out the door. The people of the kingdom knew where he was going, and the crowd in the streets, well, they just kept growing. And they stood and they cheered and they shouted and smiled and hoped the kingdom would be saved by this child. And the prince gave them a crisp salute as he marched past them all down the main route. And at the end he stood up very straight and he simply walked out of the gate. Once outside of the kingdom, he tried to stay brave as he walked towards the dragon cave. He could smell the fire of their breath and he wondered if he would meet his death. But he remembered what his father had said, that most of the fear was inside his head. So when he got near the cave, he looked all around, but he saw no dragons upon the ground. So he walked closer and then he heard some noise, and though it scared him a bit, he kept in his poise. And then he got to the edge of the cave and looked in and saw countless numbers of dragons within. But when the dragons saw him, they scattered and hid, even though the prince was just a little kid. And the prince, he couldn't believe his eyes, because to the prince's great surprise, the dragons, so many, were as small as could be. In fact, they only came up to his knee. And when they breathed fire, it was a tiny flame that any little matchstick could put to shame. And their teeth were sharp and white and shiny. But they were also so very tiny. The teeth they had were as small as a pin and wouldn't even bite through the prince's skin. So the prince walked right into the cave, just as a prince and the king should behave. And one small dragon came out looking for a sweet and sat on the ground at the prince's feet. And the prince was convinced by this little sight that his father, the great king, was absolutely right. The fear was just like the king had said. It had all been in the prince's head. So the prince left the cave and headed back to town, and all the people saw him come down. And they clapped their hands and shouted with joy as the kingdom had been saved by this boy. The prince climbed up and stood on the wall, and this is what he told them all. There is really no reason for dread. All the fear is just in your head. The dragons, they can do nothing to us, and there's really no reason to fuss. So have no fear of dragons' attacks. In fact, dragons will never be back. And with all of that, the townspeople cheered, because the prince had quelled the thing they most feared. And the prince tried to tell them the dragons were small, but they would not listen, not one listened at all. So the prince carried on protecting the town, and of course he never let them down, because the dragons were so small, and they were really no threat at all. And the kingdom carried on forever and filled with laughter, and the people lived happily ever. And that was the end of the dragon book. And Mikey was so glad he had taken a look, and he realized something that he never knew. If you are afraid, there are things you can do. Instead of hiding or running away, stand up and face what makes you afraid. And from that day forward, Mikey changed his mind and left his fears and worries behind. Even when he was afraid of something out there, he knew how to control his fear, and he would stand up and hold his head high like the prince and look fear in the eye. And that is always the best thing you can do if there's something that really scares you. Don't get controlled by the feelings of dread. Remember, most of the fear is in your head. This isn't to say you won't be afraid, but you should know what that fear is okay. Everyone gets nervous and has a good scare and feels like they're going into the dragon's lair. But when that happens and you don't want to go, think of the lesson the prince got to know, that when you are feeling so scared of all, you just need to remember the dragons are small.